Yeah, just waking up can tell it's gonna be a great day. Look out my window, sun shining on the freeway. For one day I'm getting paid enough. I'm barely out of bed, I'm already blazing up.
What is up, my wizards? It is Dev back again from the place with the decks down there. We do other stuff, it's mostly decks. Today we've got something we've been talking about for like a month. This is Azorius Flyers. Gotten a lot of support for this over the last few weeks. In the comments, someone's always like, what about Azorius Flyers? It's a good deck. It is a good deck, it turns out. And in case you hadn't heard, what I've done with this is this includes absolutely no spells, you guys. This is all creatures. You don't really see a blue-white all-creatures deck every day, but it's something different, and I think it's really exciting, and I think it's actually kind of good. It has its foibles, but, you know, every deck does, right? Let's give it a shot, because I think this is actually a super interesting deck, especially post-rotation. Well, the deck plays 34 creatures. and the rest are lands, 26 lands. 34 creatures, so let's go ahead and get started. We've got 4 copies of Hangarback Walker, the only non-flying creature in the deck, but you know what it does? It makes flying creatures, and it's super good at it too, it turns out. This is a really good 2-drop for us, you know. I'm listing it first because it technically is 0 casting cost thing, but really good 2-drop, which, you know, we don't have that many options for. I thought about Territorial Roc in the 2-drop slot, but honestly, he did make the sideboard, I think. Territorial Roc is actually kind of really good, like, a lot against aggro, but moving to the sideboard because he's only good against aggro. But in any case, as far as 2-drops go, Hangarback is probably the best option format for us. Of course, we are playing the other insane 2-drop. Don't worry, we'll get there. But here's a 1-drop. We're playing 4 copies of Faerie Miscreants, because it's really good. This is just fine in a lot of ways. Now, of course, it'll block and die against a lot of aggro decks, but it'll often trade in the process. It turns out all we need is 1 power to defeat a lot of the things in mono-red aggro, except for, you know, Monastery Swiftspear. But still, that's not too bad. We can definitely do some work with it, and when we do get to draw the card, that's amazing, it turns out. I just like a lot of things about it. You'll see that there's a theme that, since we're not playing spells, our creatures are sort of spells, you know, the things that do things for us other than attack, you know. And this is basically 1 mana draw a card if you've already got 1 out, and that's a spell. Again, you'll see a trend in that as we go on. For instance, here's 4 copies of Stratus Dancer, the other insane 2-drop flyer. Of course, we can play this as a 2-mana 2/1 flyer. That's actually not a bad deal at all. It is really aggressive on the second turn, and we'll trade up with, or just trade with a lot of the things that they'll play on the second turn if they're an aggro deck. If not, it'll just fly over their heads. Now, of course, as a morph, this is very interesting and super good. Does take a while to set up. You know, you can't morph it up until the 4th turn. We do need Stratus Dancer to take care of some mid-game spells, namely Languish, End Hostilities, all the other things people are playing. People are playing Tragic Arrogance, friggin' Crux of Fate. I mean, there's 1,000 things. So we've got to have this to take care of, especially Languish on the play. Kind of sucks we can't do it on the draw. 4 copies of Silumgar Sorcerer, another spell creature thing, and this one has Flash, which is a super good ability. Flash, one of my favorite abilities ever. But in any case, yeah, this counters creatures, which is like, we need that. This exploits Hangarback Walker really well. That's a cool trick that you can do. You're welcome for that. But aside from that, you know, we need to counter things, and we don't have actual counter spells. So this goes a long way. I mean, Flash is awesome. Being able to counter things is awesome. You know, 2 power flying for 3 men is pretty awesome. A cool trick and synergy with Hangarback Walker. I just don't see any reason not to play this card. It's just ideal for the deck. 4 copies of Vryn Wingmare. A lot of things come together with this card. We are playing an awful lot. This is one of the deck's weak points, honestly. We are playing an awful lot of very high curve creatures with no actual ramp to speak of. So what this does is slows down some decks by a turn so that we can catch up and get into the mid-game and play our really big threats, because 4th and 5th to 6th, 7th turns, we're just going to be playing, you know, huge, ridiculous junk. They're going to be very important threats for us. But we have to get to that point in the game, and Wingmare helps us out a little bit there, you know. Hurts burn players, or really mono-red aggro, which is more or less a burn deck with some prowess creatures. So it's good against that, and good against control. You know, it puts, again, those mass removal spells a turn into the future, or they have to Hero's Downfall this or Ultimate Price it, whatever. But this does a lot of work for us, and is a 2-power flyer in its own right. So, you know, trades against aggro and can just fly in for 2 against slower, you know, control decks and things like that. Very versatile, which again, a trend, you know. And this is sort of like an enchantment creature that's not an enchantment, you know. Again, a spell creature that does something when it's on the board for us. Very important. Now we get into the big stuff. 2 copies of Whirler Rogue, which is a flexible slot. You don't absolutely need this, but it's got really good synergy with the Wyvern. You know, you get 7 power for 4 mana when you do that, and you can make dudes unblockable, which is just crazy. I want to play at least the 2 copies of Whirler Rogue, but we're really pushing these high mana cards here. So I kind of had to cut what I thought was least important in the scheme of things, and compared to the other cards we're playing high up on the curve, this is definitely, you know, just a cut below the rest, but still, you know, 3 creatures for 4 mana and a second ability, making things unblockable. Like, just, we already have a lot of evasion in the deck, but just in case we have to get past, you know, any of the ridiculous dragons that people are playing nowadays, this is awesome. Here's something you knew you were going to see. A playset, 4 copies of Thunderclap Wyvern, one of the more integral parts of the deck, you know. Flash is absolutely insane on this card, you know. I'd always been, you know, stoked to play with it, and I hadn't played with it before testing this deck, but it's every bit as good as I thought it would be. And opponents fear it, you know. If you've got 4 open mana and some flyers out, they're going to think twice about doing a lot of things, especially during combat on their turn, you know. It's going to be really hard to justify swinging in with a lot if you've got 4 open mana, because obviously the Wyvern blocks and makes all your other dudes bigger. I mean, there's so many good things about this thing, and even at the, you know, end of their turn, Wyvern is just crazy. Or even swing in, and once they make blocks, boom, you know, Wyvern. That's very, very good. So there's just so many surprise ways you can play this, so many different ways they have to sort of fear and respect it, you know. They always have to, it's sort of like a counterspell almost, you know. If you've got open mana, they have to play around this card. It's very, very important that they do that. So I love everything about Wyvern now that I've played it. We have to play a playset in something like this, obviously. 2 copies of Archangel of Tithes, which we totally have the mana for, don't worry. Against other creature-based decks, this really puts us over the top. Because, you know, something like Green Red Devotion, which will be out of the format in just like 6 weeks, that's important to remember. Outclasses this on the top end, which is where we want to be, is on the top end, but they're going to play slightly more threatening things on their turn than we'll play on ours, and they'll do it a little bit faster with all the excel that's in the format. So we have to worry about those decks a little bit, and this puts us on par with them in some ways. You know, they've got the mana, but they have to spend the mana in order to block or attack. There's just a lot of good things about Archangel against those decks specifically, and against smaller decks once we get her out, especially considering she's a really good blocker in her own right. So love everything about Archangel, and just ended up I had to play her. What would it be without dragons? We're playing 2 copies of Ojutai and 2 copies of Icefall Regent. I split the difference. I love both cards so much. Obviously, Ojutai is the more popular and important creature in Standard right now, and it's good to have a hex-proof dude. Now, they're not going to know, especially game 1, that you're not playing any spells. So if you play an Ojutai, they're still going to be looking for you to have some sort of instant speed response to something they do during your combat step when you swing in. People are sort of conditioned at this point to just believe that you have something to project Ojutai, a Valor Stance or something like that. So at this point, I mean, especially game 1, they are not going to know that you don't have any instant speed ways to do something about this. I mean, there are some ways you can flip up Stratus Dancer. There are some ways to deal with it, don't worry. But at the same time, Ojutai is just always really good. Hexproof, threat, 5 power flyer, gotta play him, and Icefall Regent is removal, which is something we are sorely, sorely lacking, you know, in big board stalls, which we do sort of well in because all of our dudes fly. That's pretty important. But in, you know, when they're playing matching us threat for threat later on in the game, against some decks in the format, this is really good, it turns out. Have liked Icefall up to this point. I'd like to play even more of him, but again, we're really, really pushing it on the high end of the curve, which I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. People are going to be like, man, this curve is ridiculous. But that's where all the awesome stuff is in Azorius Flyers, and I want to play all of this awesome stuff, so forgive me. Speaking of awesome stuff, last creature in the deck. 2 copies of Wingmate Roc. Yeah, we're playing absolutely, again, nothing but creatures and lands in the deck, so we're going to be attacking quite a lot, especially considering we've got all the evasion in the world. I mean, we're going to be attacking constantly. So Wingmate Roc is just too much value to pass up on. I mean, I want to play the 5-mana dragons too. I mean, maybe I've got a problem and I just want to play all the huge mana cards, but we're not playing anything above the curve. Nothing past 5, right? So we're sort of a mid-range deck, you know. I'm trying to justify it, but Wingmate Roc, again, too much value to pass up. I mean, just crazy card, making 2 creatures. This helps out our resiliency a little bit. They both fly, they're both 3 power. One of the more important cards in Standard for a while. Its relevance has sort of dropped off, but it does have quite the impressive pedigree for the last year or so, and I still love Wingmate Roc a lot. So, want to play the card. 26 lands in this deck here. This is pretty straightforward, I would say. I mean, we can play these tap lands. We only have the 4 copies of a 1-drop, so this is like another 1-drop, the tap lands. Mage-Ring Network, obviously that helps us out, I think you can tell, with sort of all the high-end junk that we're trying to play. And Haven and Spirit Dragon, we're playing some dragons. So it's a pretty straightforward, cut and dry mana base here, I think. Here's the sideboard for you. First of all, we can transition into a sort of more control-y sort of deck. Here's where the spells are, by the way. End Hostilities, Ojutai's command. We've got, obviously, Silumgar's command, or Silumgar's Scorn in there. All of these make for a more control-y deck, you know. Here are your power rankings. The final score of 55, which is, you know, it's close to where you want to be. I mean, the deck isn't entirely budget, but it's not incredibly expensive. Obviously, the Hangarbacks and the Ojutais will cost you a couple of bucks, but other than that, it's not so bad. It's not a terribly expensive deck. It's not a really budget deck either, but, you know. Anyway, as far as the power rankings go, I mean, power is fairly high. We are playing some very powerful cards in the standard format. Again, Hangarback, Ojutai, you know, Wingmate Roc, again, impressive pedigree on the card. There's a lot of good stuff. Stratus Dancer, a lot of people are playing, you know, so I think it has a fairly high power ranking, but if I could give it a 6.5, I might do that. Speed, you know, we're not the fastest deck ever. We're playing a lot of higher end threats, but we are playing, you know, if we curve right, we can play a creature every turn. Every single turn. So it has some speed to it. Synergy, not a whole lot of synergies in the deck, to be honest with you. But the deck is just trying to play a threat every single turn, especially from the 3rd turn on. And it does that very well. It doesn't really require synergies to do it. Versatility is a 5. That's the thing. We have trouble with decks that go way up under us, trouble with decks that go way up over us. Even though we go pretty high. We go pretty high up on the curve, but something like Green-Red Devotion just plays more significant threats than us. And Dragonlord Ojutai beats any of our flyers any day. So after that deck rotates out of the format, we still have to worry about Ojutai, of course, but after that deck rotates out of the format, we'll have a much better time of it, I think. And resiliency is just fine. There's some cards that help out our resiliency here, you know. We've got flash creatures, we've got Faerie Miscreants, can draw us a card. Hangarback Walker single-handedly brings up our resilience rating. Archangel of Tithes is a good card to play after, you know, wipes or mass removal. A lot of good things. Our Whirler Rogue helps our resiliency rating out, so it's a little higher than usual. Just Hangarback Walker by itself is crazy. Offense is a 7 because that's all we do in the deck. That's all we care about. Defense is a 3 because we have no real removal elements other than Icefall and a couple of basic things, you know, creatures that counter spells. Game 1 and board are the same because we have a transitional sideboard. It's entirely possible that we totally, you know, juke them once we get to board. So that's actually really cool when that happens. But I think it's about the same after boards because there's just really not a whole lot of sideboard strategies that are awesome against something like this right now. You know, sideboard strategies are tuned to deal with specific decks, and this ain't really one of them. And then consistency is a 6 because there are times where you end up mulliganing to, that's a hard word to say, mulliganing to 5, and then, you know, you've still just got a bunch of 4-drops in your hand. That's the real problem, is that we have to have a lot of lands. That's why we're playing 26. We have to get our drops. That's the deck for now. I've had a lot of fun playing this deck. Honestly, really, it's very, very different. They will not see this coming. And again, first game especially, they're going to assume that you have spells. They're going to assume that you're playing spells because you have plains and islands. And so, who ever heard of a blitz Azorius blitz deck, basically. And it's really cool, you know, all of our creatures have some form of evasion other than Hangarback, although we sort of want it to die. And we can exploit it with Silumgar Sorcerer. That's a cool piece of synergy. So the deck has a lot of really fun things it can do, and even though it doesn't have any spells per se, it does have a lot of cool things it can do to respond, so, or to remove threats, you know. There are things it can do. Our creatures are our spells. Just think of it that way. That's all I got for now. Here's what I'm doing next time. This is another sort of secret deck tech that I haven't mentioned yet, but I have completely fallen in love with this deck over the last week. I'm going to do Orzhov Tragic Arrogance. I can't even say it, I'm so giddy. I'm really excited about this deck. When I first conceptualized this deck, Tragic Arrogance, I didn't expect it to be very good. I sort of figured it would be, you know, sort of budgety thing. But as I've built it, this deck is actually insane. It is one of my it's one of my favorite decks to play in like the last 4 months. You know I'm dragging on in time here, but I just have to tell you how amazing this deck is so that you won't see the thumbnail and be like, oh, it's stupid, well, I'll wait for the next one. No, Tragic Arrogance is a very, very good deck. Very, very good deck. So stay tuned for that. I've still got all the other deck techs coming, don't worry, but Tragic Arrogance is just, I've fallen so much in love with it that it's a pet project and you have to know, the world has to know. So we're doing that next time, but we'll get on to the cooler stuff later. In any case, if you like the content, do me a favor, like, share, comment, subscribe, helps the channel grow, which it has done a lot of recently. Thank you, and welcome all the new subscribers to SBMTG. And, you know, comment. Let us know what you think. I mean, there's a reason you subscribed. I want to know what you think. You're probably a pretty good Magic player. So do all the things, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.